State. I'm trying to eat down a whole nother plate. Seem like my homies was stuck in the hood. I just told them be safe in the state.
Welcome to the Black Myth Podcast. Welcome to the Black Myth Podcast. I'm your host, Too Black. This is part 2 of the myth, Afrocentricity equals Pan-Africanism. In part 1, we interviewed Dr. Layla Brown. We're going to continue with that conversation. Just a quick recap of the first episode. Both her and I had a discussion about the differences between Pan-Africanism and Afrocentricity from where we saw it. Then we went into the debate between Molefi Asante, the founder of, or not the founder, but I guess the originator of the coiner of the term Afrocentricity within the academic realm. And then that debate was versus Kwame Toure, formerly known as Stokely Carmichael, who was part of the All African People's Revolutionary Party, SNCC, one of the helped popularize Black Power, the phrase, and many other. Both of them have long resumes. So we're going to continue with the discussion about that debate, and then we're going to move forward into recently there was a Pan-African summit that was held in Ghana. We previewed a bit in part 1. That was hosted by some Chicago rappers, Vic Mensa and Chance the Rapper and a few others. And we're going to talk about how that really compares to the vision of Nkrumah's Pan-Africanism, since that's what they said they were attempting to do. And then we're also going to talk about some developments on the west coast of Africa, within Mali, Guinea, and Burkina Faso. So we're going to close out on that. I hope everybody enjoyed part 1. Again, this is not a comprehensive a comprehensive covering of everything related to Afrocentricity and Pan-Africanism. We understand there's much more to discuss, but for the sake of time and brevity, we're using these examples to help get a better understanding of these concepts. So I hope everybody enjoys that, and we're going to get into it. Thank you. Something he says about socialism, and then try to get something on Nkrumah, and then we can get off this so we can wrap this up.
An idea and another European.
It's 2 jumped. Come here.
Wasn't a good idea. Julius Nyerere wrote a whole book called African Socialism, and I think that basically what the president of Tanzania was trying to deal with was this whole question that somehow we should not be pitted between one European idea and another European idea. That Africa itself has contributed enough in terms of how human beings deal, that we don't have to be stuck with the heavy baggage of historic failure that we see both in capitalism and in the worst forms of socialism.
That was an interesting pause, but
yeah, I don't know if you want to play that last, but yeah.
But yeah, so there you get the whole myth that socialism is a European concept, or socialism is a European idea. That's just literally not true. Even if you are a capitalist, you can't tell me that socialism's not solely a European idea. It's really, like Kwame Toure says earlier, it's an economic system of who will control the resources. That's really it. But there has been. Say what?
No, it's funny because I'm thinking about, I know we were talking about this before we started filming. We were going back to the conversation that CBS and I did for Monthly Review Press on Nkrumah's Conscientism. But again, not to make an unnecessary conflation, but the entire project of Conscientism was Nkrumah attempting to think about philosophically the goals and objectives of African liberation and freedom through the experiences of African people. And I was just wanted to look up the year, because if I'm not mistaken, that book was published many years before Afrocentricity was, right? And so even in I'm kind of going back to that first,
64, 65, something like that.
So going back to that, the segment that we were even thinking about before, this idea that people are not already attempting to struggle and think about what does it mean to have ideology from our own lived experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm always bothered by people's decision to hone in on the failures of socialism in the same way that I made the argument about corrupt puppet African leaders. The failures of socialism cannot be adequately assessed by themselves. Like you cannot just look at places where people have attempted to engage in a socialist project and say it failed miserably here, and this is the problem with socialism, because it was never able they were never able to create a system whereby they were able to thrive exclusively under socialism, number one. And when we think about the world that we live in, post-colonial, post-slavery, whatever, many places in the world don't even have the ability to, or I shouldn't say they don't. They've been intentionally underdeveloped, right? On one hand, but even in terms of like crops, you think about the documentary Life and Debt, which is about the sort of all the World Bank, IMF shit. The fact that Jamaica has all these damn cattle farms, but somehow still imports powdered milk. Why? These are byproducts of a global system that put capitalism into play, right? To say that these countries cannot independently produce the resources that they need. And so when countries who are attempting to engage in socialism fail at a moment where they cannot produce all of their needs independently for them, so they have to be able to exist in cooperation with other countries. And when places like the United States and Europe are doing their best to impede that through sanctions, through blockades, through all these other formal types of impositions, we don't know what a successful socialist government could even look like, because we've never been able to see it be enacted in a real way. And so I find that argument a bit disingenuous on his part as an intellectual.
No, I mean, I don't disagree. Yeah, I think he's engaging in that to try to uphold Afrocentricity as this, I guess, for lack of a better term, third way, which has been tried prior as well. Like other people have tried even when people say African socialism, that was supposed to be its kind of third way, right? Even though we're saying it's socialist, or it's not this, it's not Soviet, Stalinism or something, which I think there's merit in that, in sense of trying to figure out something else that's more particular to the experience. Walter Rodney addresses some of these contradictions himself in that last book that just came out. He addressed it way back, but in the book Decolonial Marxism, he talks about some of that. He actually even critiques Nkrumah a little bit, because he says he didn't necessarily have a good grasp of class struggle until later. That's another conversation as well. But say what?
I just said, yeah, we'll save that one.
Yeah. But yeah, I think, it seems like he's doing this to prop up Afrocentricity. Like that's kind of like, basically, we should try Afrocentricity because these European ideas have failed, right? So we need to do the African thing. But in doing that, he just makes a real error in associating socialism with a European thing, like when it's just doesn't, that's just not historically accurate, but it's like, that just doesn't hold up. I get what he's saying. If you were to just like kind of draw or step back for a second, just think about it as, let's not do European things, let's do African things. If those things are easily distinguishable, but some things also don't have these clear European African lines, and one of those things is just the actual material world. So you can't say that this economic system is just white and Eurocentric just because white folks are the main, proponents of something. You have to actually still analyze what the thing is. You can't just say that just because white people are spokespeople for something. And I think that's another thing we get caught up in when we see white folks as spokespeople. And I understand it because white people often are more than often or, you know, on bullshit. So when we see that they're speaking for something, we're already skeptical. That's understandable. But you still got to look at things for what they actually are, not simply just say, okay, white folks speak for it, so it's just Eurocentric or just European. I think that's another mistake that's made. And I think Afrocentricity, even beyond Asante, it can be better than that, even when it's Afrocentricity. I don't think it has to make that error, even if you're speaking as an Afrocentrist. I don't think you have to make that kind of error all the time. I think in some ways it hopefully has grown from that, and even maybe Asante has grown. I'm trying to be graceful here, but I'm just saying, I think that even if you are on that side of the camp, I don't think you have to fall into that pitfall of simply always labeling things Afrocentric or European, when sometimes you just have to deal with things with the basis of what they are, you know.
Exactly.
Okay, lastly, something he says about Nkrumah that kind of brings it back. Then we'll be done here, hopefully.
Nkrumah believed.
Yeah, it's a little too far.
Nkrumah, who articulated the idea of Pan-Africanism in a concrete way coming out of his philosophy of consciencism, was what you might call an incipient Afrocentrist. He didn't say that, but any individual who says...
I know some people aren't watching this, but for those who are, I just want people to see Kwame Toure's face.
Pan-Africanists before Afrocentricity, but those individuals, like, for example, Kwame Nkrumah, who articulated the idea of Pan-Africanism
He's going to nod first, and then he's going to hear what he says after. He's going to look at him.
In a concrete way coming out of his philosophy of consciencism, was what you might call an incipient Afrocentrist. He didn't say that, but any individual who says that our particular response to the universe must be from our own culture is an Afrocentrist. I mean, that's a person who's an agent. That's a person who's an actor. Kwame Nkrumah believed fundamentally in an Afrocentric worldview. But what I am saying, my position is that if you say you are a Pan-Africanist and you are not Afrocentric, then the question is, and perhaps Kwame Toure can answer this, are you a Eurocentrist?
More questions that I'd like to ask before we take our break and then turn over to...
Unfortunately, he didn't get to respond directly to that because they asked another question. But there was a lot there.
So what's okay, so when I go back to the academic hubris, what's also really amazing to me about him making that claim is that he's making that claim as a person who studied Nkrumah, right? Sitting next to a person who studied under and with Nkrumah in real life, and then makes a decision to call Nkrumah an incipient, incipient Afrocentrist.
Incipient Afrocentrist.
Now, for Pan-Africanists, Africa is primary, okay? And there's importance to that, right? The primacy of Africa, always coming back to what is the current state of people, ideas, struggle, infrastructure, like all those things are true, right? But again, if Afrocentrism gets sort of relegated to the space of a particular kind of ideology, which is about centering culture, again, the reason why I think, how I think Kwame Toure would have responded to that claim about Nkrumah would be, again, that he was fundamentally concerned with the material circumstances and conditions of his people. And when I say his people, I don't just mean Ghanaians. I mean people, his African peoples. And so again, just not far. This is a bold claim that I don't really, I don't know this. You may know. I haven't looked into it enough, but I really wonder if people have since asked him about that. Because I guess this going on almost 20 years now, so 17 years ago. I wonder if that's something that he would still stake his claim on to try to make that claim. I don't know. I'm curious.
I doubt it, but I haven't been able to find anything that he responded to. I know on BPM sometimes he was actually on BPM not too long ago for a new book he just put out. That's neither here nor there, but they didn't ask him about any of these things, so I don't know. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, again, I'm trying to read this gracefully. I told myself before we did this episode that I would, just so I didn't get too factional or anything. But I think so. I'm gonna add my own interpretation here, but I think he was really just debating, like you do when you debate, and you get a bit, hyperbolic when you have to draw a line between you and somebody that you may not even actually disagree with that much. And it felt like in doing that, he took himself to places that, like you're just saying things that don't actually make sense. Because he called
him, he asked if he was Eurocentric at the end.
That's
what he said to him.
And he never actually responds directly to that because they had asked another question. And this is like, come on, bro. Yeah. Like that's what I'm saying. He was just doing that thing. He was basically trolling, like that's what I'm saying.
He was trolling.
Like he was just trolling. Because it's like you can't, that's not even, I'm saying when you're debating somebody and you're just trying to prove your point, that's the type of stuff you do. You start trolling, you start saying things that are way over the top because you really don't have an argument in some cases, but it's like, are you a Eurocentrist? And like he says, I played that clip earlier, which he said later in the debate, where it's like, I arrived at Pan-Africanism before Afrocentricity, and a lot of people did because it's been around for almost 100 years at this point on paper, with when you're just dealing with the conference, let alone, the other ways it's been practiced. But I also just think there's this thing with academics where there's this tendency to look back, and because I have written down a kind of like conceptualized theory that now I can read everybody into my theory. Feminism does this a lot. There's different even certain interpretations of Marxism and socialism does this a lot where they want to read people into their thing. Like I know people try to do this with Malcolm X and socialism, and it's like Malcolm probably was going there, but he never actually arrived. He was anti-capitalist by the time he passed. He wasn't like a card-carrying communist by the time he passed, though. Like you can't make that claim. You just got to deal with people for what they were. And I also respect the ideas that they struggled through in their own time, as opposed to saying, because I created these ideas. Now you can say there's a genealogy there. There's some connection, so yes, there's people who were claiming some kind of like feminist tendencies even before that term came to being, because that term is just conceptualizing stuff people were already doing. But you can't go back and say this person was that, or this person was a socialist, this person was a feminist, just because now you have words for it. Like it just doesn't like.
And, maybe much to Molefi's chagrin, his privileging of information based on written access to it and having coined it is actually quite Eurocentric.
Yeah, good point.
In all of the ways that the Academy is Eurocentric, right?
Yeah.
And so and that's actually a part of the problem, right? Because Molefi focuses on sort of Black culture, he gets read as an Afrocentrist, but then the ways that you engage in structural whiteness and you take it up as your own and you discount and discredit the real evidence of sort of oral histories, of other ways of engaging in forms of thought, because it's not documented in the way that the Western Academy says it should be documented, then are you really doing the work that you say you're doing? So that's, I mean, like you said, I also came into this not wanting to perpetuate this like binary divide between Pan-Africanism and Afrocentricity, but then I'll be listening to the things that he says, and it's
Well, it's like,
getting me wrapped.
well, these things are just, I mean, it's just factually incorrect. Again, if he wants to say we need to have ideas before we enter, that's a point of debate. Like, I mean, we may not agree with that, but that's like a real point of debate. Like, if they had stayed there, it'd been fine. But when you start trying to do that thing that I've seen in people's debates, where to win the debate, you claim the opposite end is actually you, which is just lazy in general, right? Like, you just claim that actually, you know, liberals are really conservatives, because like that's just a weak, you know, I hate when people do that really with anything. It's like, no, stand on what you want. There's a reason we're on stage and we're both on different sides of it. Stand on that. You know, you can say there's obviously overlap, but don't do that. Don't do that thing where, you know, he was a incipient, or he was one of the precursors to what you wrote down, when this man published, I don't know how many books talking about Nkrumah, and he's a precursor while running a nation. Yeah.
But even if he is, what's important about that is that Nkrumah goes on record many times saying that Marcus Garvey was one of the most influential people in his own thought. But Marcus Garvey was a capitalist. He was. And so even as we can look to Nkrumah and his legacy and the way that he has helped us understand, articulate Pan-Africanism, and he can acknowledge that one of the biggest influences of him doing that was learning from Garvey. We don't get to then say that Garvey himself is a Pan-Africanist in the same way that Nkrumah understands Pan-Africanism, because he was not promoting socialism. And that's fine. You like you said, you can draw the genealogy, you can make the connections, you can acknowledge the influences, but it ain't the same. It ain't the same, right? No. Like that. Garvey's ideas about economic structures were not the same as the ones Nkrumah eventually came around to in his ideas about what an unliberated and unified Africa should look like.
And it's because Garvey went through that struggle, even though the people were wrestling with Garvey even when he was alive. But also Garvey, by going through that struggle, informs, you know, what we can do now. Like, and that's just history in general. It informs things so we can arrive at different conclusions because we saw the example. We studied that. So we can then be like, okay, capitalism ain't gonna work. Now, again, people like Hubert Harrison did not like Garvey very much and was very critical of Garvey. But I'm just saying, like, these struggles, you can look at them and learn from them. But to just be like, the whole history now is what I conceived it as, like, it's just, like you said, there's a certain arrogance to that. And I don't know if that's even the best representation of Afrocentricity, to be fair. I don't think even all Afrocentrists would take that line, to be fair. So I don't want anybody to listen to this and think that this is everything, but it's important to play this because this is the person who coined Afrocentricity. This is the person who wrote the book on it and wrote hundreds. I think he said when he was on BPM, he's written over 100 books now. So there is some significance to this statement, you know, that where people took this up. So, yeah, I mean, there's more here, but our goal here is not to play the entire debate, like I said when we started. So if people want to go back and listen to that, they can. I would encourage you to, if you want to get a better sense of the distinction. We'll leave a links to a few other things. There's actually not as much criticism in academic writing of Afrocentricity as I would have thought when I looked into it.
Because people don't say it's because when we promote our own sort of theories, people don't actually take these black schools of thought seriously in the same way that they take these others. And I think there needs to be much more work done to have an engaged principle critique, right? Not just to tear it down, but to actually really treat it like it is as a school of thought. These are the things that they put forth, and where are the cracks and the breaks and the holes. But I do think, you know, you can run the transition however you want to, but it is an interesting segue into the Black Star Line Festival, having the conversation about Nkrumah and Garvey, because that is how they framed the festival.
So there's two things we want to talk about, and we'll close out. We don't have to speak on these two things super long, but as you spoke to the other conference that you attended, you know, about 20 years apart, but this Black Star Line festival that was led by Vic Mensa, Chance the Rapper, and a few other. It seemed like a Chicago kind of thing. And then
it was definitely a Chicago and Accra situation.
Okay. That's what it felt like. And then they had the Black Star Line Festival, which is just a music festival, and that it is what it is. And then there was a Pan-African Summit. I'm gonna play a clip from that Vic Mensa spoke about Pan-Africanism and his understanding of it. And again, there's that on that side, and then there's what's happening, still within similarly in the region of West Africa, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Guinea are forming a federation, and there's been some struggles against the French up there. And we were talking about Nkrumah earlier. We also talked about Lumumba, but that was another part of Nkrumah's plan was to actually form a federation. And him and Lumumba had actually signed something to do that, but that was short-lived because
Ghana, Guinea, and Mali. Ghana, Guinea, and Mali actually had what do you call it? I forget exactly what they called it. But it's what led to Nkrumah becoming the co-president of Guinea when it was overthrown, because they had already had that agreement in place. So there is some history again for all of these groups of creating a type of alliance there. Right.
So that's its own version of Pan-Africanism, which deals more with trying to
we'll talk about that.
I'm just saying that's its own version of Pan-Africanism that deals more with the geographical alignment. And then there's the Black Star Line Festival that deals more with the cultural thing, where we talk about where Afrocentricity and Pan-Africanism seem to kind of just merge together in an interesting kind of way. So I'm going to play a clip from that, and you'll see Layla at the front row in this clip.
Please shut up. Go ahead. I'm going to be quiet.
Across oceans, responsibility. And that's why we're doing this today, is to foster that collaboration and that communication between us across oceans and beyond continents, beyond nation states and man-made lines given to us by colonialism. Ultimately, we aim to push forth the message and the principle and the ideology of Pan-Africanism in the vein of Kwame Nkrumah, who said that you're not African because you're born in Africa, African because Africa is born in you. And this modern iteration of time is just a blip in the drop of an endless ocean of consciousness. This past 500 years that has separated us does not define us. Ultimately, we are all African people. We are all of this continent. And we have our similarities, we have our differences, we have our unique characteristics based on being in America, or being in Ghana, or being in Ethiopia, or being in Britain. But at the end of the day, we are all treated the same by everyone else. It's between each other that we make so many distinctions. The rest of the world groups us together. And, I think a lot about the fact that we have these common oppressors, not to define us by our oppressions, but we have these common oppressors, the same people that are incarcerated in America and making money off prisoners making Starbucks cups, Geo Group and the likes. They're the same ones in South Africa that are incarcerated in Johannesburg and in Cape Town. And the same people drilling that oil in Nigeria are the same people exploiting us in Texas. It's all interconnected. And so, it's like that common enemy, I feel, unites us and our common heritage, you know what I'm saying? And the mission here of Pan-Africanism is to connect the African people of the globe towards a common mission, and that mission is liberation. Let me hear you make some motherfucking noise for liberation one time.
All right, let's make some noise for liberation first.
It's crazy. I was actually, when you got ready to play that clip, I was like, oh, I wonder, if the angle is gonna be different, but I actually was sitting right there. Like, I don't know if I was right behind her, but if I show you my pictures from that day, it is the same angle, which is crazy. So this is the thing about that conference, right? I was excited to see how they were going to frame the conversation. I was also excited to see, so the opening conversation was like a keynote conversation between somebody who we're not gonna name and Samia Nkrumah, which is Kwame Nkrumah's daughter. What I was a little bit disappointed about what I was a little bit disappointed.
Go ahead.
I know. What I was a little bit disappointed about in that conversation was that so again, I think there was this very loose utilization of the term Pan-Africanism without, and which is odd in particular to be in this moment, like in Ghana, and having this conversation with Nkrumah's daughter, that didn't really take up the full breadth and understanding of how what Pan-Africanism was to Nkrumah at the moment that he died, right? And so it's interesting to have his name evoked so much, right? And again, even the name Black Star Line was evoked because of the Garvey connection, right? So they're attempting to like have all this kind of symbolic connection between how Garvey's vision and Nkrumah's vision, they were trying to, play on that in some kind of way.
Right.
What I found problematic about the day were quite a few things. One, I did not ever feel like there was a real conversation, an intellectual engagement with what Nkrumah's ideas were about Pan-Africanism, particularly as it relates to socialism.
Yeah, that's
and the primary reason why. And the primary, I wish I had the program with me. I should have prepared better. But the primary reason why I say that is because the concluding panel of the day was a panel of venture capitalists. And listen, okay, so prior to that, the thing is, like, they had a panel of poets, and actually, so to be fair, the panel discussion that they had with the poets and the filmmakers, I like those conversations. I think that there's always room, like Sekou Toure himself, like he actually wrote a lot about culture. We do have to take seriously what it means to be able to like narrate our own stories, to have our own narratives. Like they had a really interesting conversation about like what filmmaking looks like on the continent versus what filmmaking looks like outside, based on like, just trying to create films and have these stories from our own perspectives with the kind of limited resources that, people have, and what does it mean to actually create these kind of diasporic connections, to have better, film versions of our own stories. Like, I think there were some really interesting and productive things as it came to the arts. But I will limit it to the arts. The bookends that really disappointed me, and I won't say that it was Samia Nkrumah who disappointed me necessarily directly. I don't know that the right types of questions were asked to engage. But I also felt like, very contrary to Nkrumah's ideas about a united Africa, the conversation still felt very Ghana-centric, right? And that's in the midst of like right now, that's really problematic because Ghana does not have a progressive president at the moment. Like,
no,
we can
took another IMF loan, didn't they?
Exactly, right.
Yeah.
And so, like, while it may be that like people have this kind of what would you call it, like a kind of spiritual desire connection to come back to Ghana, and people just need to be honest. The reason why a lot of people want to come to Ghana as opposed to, because like, okay, so my cousin flew into Ghana for that, for the time that we spent together. She flew through Togo, and one of the things that she said was that it was so clear, the line between Togo and Ghana, because of how much more infrastructurally developed Ghana is. What a lot of people don't realize is that the reason why Ghana's infrastructure today is still better than most of West Africa and a lot of Africa as a continent is because of the things that Kwame Nkrumah put in place when he was president.
Yeah.
in the late 50s and early 60s, right? And so even when we think about why Americans, people who grew up in the US, could even consider going to live in a place like Ghana, it has to do with the actual material progress that was made from Nkrumah's vision of Pan-Africanism then, right? And it is not like this shit is happening now. And so to continue to kind of have that conversation about like us being in Ghana, I thought was just weird. If the conversation is supposed to be about Pan-Africanism, right? Like it just felt very Ghana centric to me. And again, there were no explicit conversations about socialism, about thinking about a different kind of economic structure, which is how we then come to a final panel of the day full of venture capitalists. And while I mean, I don't want to like shit on them as individual people. I do think that like they had like these novel, noble ideas about how to utilize, how to generate resources and utilize them for the benefits of other things. But if we're actually having a conversation about Pan-Africanism, venture capitalists, like that's not like we have to have more of a critique of it, right? Even if we say this is a point of entry, right? This is where we can begin to get resources, right. But we also still have to have a critical conversation about what that means. Cool. Like I could have given it a little bit more there, right, but there was no critical conversation about their role or engagement as venture capitalists. It was like, yo, this is where we make this money, so we need to get this money. Okay. But then I think even beyond that, structurally, I don't think the conference lent itself to community in the way that they imagine, because I think there's a lot of evidence in organizing spaces where people attempt to create what, like a while ago they were calling it like the unconference or whatever, but when the whole structure of the day is panels that are talking at people and you don't really build in time for people to engage the ideas themselves, then you have to actually question what type of work you're doing to build community among people. And so like for me, those are like my big kind of takeaways. And I will say that like I was really excited about the idea of it. I didn't necessarily have the highest hopes and expectations, but I will say that even the hopes and expectations that I did have about the conference were not really met.
Yeah, I mean that sounds like a fairly balanced perspective, you know. Considering what I know off record, that's a fairly balanced perspective. Yeah, I mean, I wasn't there, so I don't want to speak to something that I wasn't really a part of very much, and obviously, you know, I can watch the video or whatever, but like, you know, that's not the same experience. But just seeing how like the most just like surface stuff, like the most extensive breakdown of this conference or whatever you want to call it, is in Forbes magazine, right? Like if you Google it, that's the most like the longest article is in Forbes.com. So take that for what you want to take that for. It was sponsored by Revolt Television, that's Puff's channel, or what, Diddy or whatever. You know, there's been, I mean, I've written about this and talked about this myself. There's been just a general trend towards this kind of buy black. You know, I don't even want to call it nationalism, honestly, because a lot of these, at least the nationalists were trying to like do capitalism for a little bit of independence. It doesn't even seem like that's what's happening. At least it's appeared on the surface that they were, but now it's just this kind of like support black stuff and get all these corporate sponsors, which just seem to have with the airlines and things of that nature. I mean, I don't want to be too cynical, but it just seems like it's in line with that same trend of corporations finding that there's a market to support the kind of buy black business, black entrepreneurial, and throwing a little bit of funds into that. And some of it aligns with tech, because there's like the Afro tech people are deep into.
There's a lot of tech stuff.
Yeah, like I figured. Yeah, so it's like that just seems to be a trend, and they use that stuff to bring people in who obviously are hungry for something. I think the people who go to these things are often, or most of them, I think, are genuinely trying to find some kind of connection, you know. But I think setup, like you said, even the panel and all that stuff for me just feels very much like they're whether Vic and Chance know it or not, I can't make that claim, but it just seems very much in line with that. It doesn't seem like a break from any of the stuff that we've seen as, I really think, a watering down of more, of a more collective rage to just buying Black and supporting business. It seems to be in line with that, even if it's in Ghana,
Well, so this is the thing I'll say about it. The reason why it's important that it felt like a Chicago in Accra conference is because I will give them the credit that everything they did was free. So they weren't charging people for the conference, for the summit, or for the concert. They were both free. You just had to sign up for them. However, I don't know. I think that the majority of those in attendance at the summit were not local. Right. Yeah. And so for me, when it's about bridging gaps and whatever, and making connections, it feels like there needs to be more thought put into what it means to make something appealing and accessible to local people. I felt like a reunion with a lot of people that I knew from the States there, right? And I mean, also, like, this happened in Dirty December, right? So there's already a bunch of like concerts and things going on, and this whole, like, it's already the vibe there. Like, there are free concerts and there are paid concerts, and it's just kind of like the season for all that stuff to kind of be happening. So like, that part is cool, and I mean, the concert was cool. Like, it was nice to showcase Ghanaian artists with big headlining US artists, and maybe make some kind of connections for that, whatever. But again, as a concert standalone, cool, great, fun. But when you then try to make it into something else that is the Pan-African Summit, that I think there was a lot that was lacking in that. I hope that but I haven't seen this, but I hope that they are open to some kind of feedback about what, if they continue, because they say they plan to continue to do this. They also said that they put the whole thing together in a year. So like, that may account for some other things. But I hope, to me, if the goal is really about building connections between people, then you have to have something other than the echo chamber. Like, it can't just be those people who you invited to participate in the conference. But I, as a person who was there, haven't seen anything that really has asked for critique or feedback about how things went and what types of things might be better. Excuse me. And I particularly mean that in relationship to the summit, not to the concert. I'm less concerned about the concert, but I wish that there was more desire to actually have something meaningful come out of the summit itself. Because like, there wasn't even an attempt to like just have a collective shared roster of information so that people who attended the summit could stay in contact with each other. Because all they did was post things on their Instagram page. So like, there really was no like place of meeting.
Some of that just sounds like the problem of no organization. I don't even know if that's even part of some bigger scheme. That just sounds like you just don't have like that's just like, I think, a consequence of us just not having that kind of, like, what we were talking about with the debate and what Kwame Toure, it was already dying off then. Like, that sense of like that kind of organization was already dying off then, and he was one of the last kind of like torch bearers for that kind of formation. And now it's even worse. So it's like, I don't even think, even if they met well, I don't even think that was going to carry on into it, just because it's just not really meshed into the culture. But I think, I don't know, isn't there a larger critique to be made about like the repatriation of so-called Black Americans to Ghana? And that's been a point of struggle for a long time, and this seems to kind of be in lieu of that as well. Is that fair?
It's a major point of contention. I mean, the thing, and I guess the best way for people in the US to understand it is the same way we understand gentrification here. Like, when people are repatriating to Africa, not just Ghana, but when they're repatriating with US dollars, they are increasing the cost of living in a place where the what do you call it? Where the currency, the money is not worth the same
rate.
as dollar.
Yeah.
And so it actually, in a lot of ways, structurally makes life harder for a lot of people on the continent when we do that, and when we do it uncritically and we're not aware of it. And so, as much as people are talking about making these connections, I saw a lot of increased tension. Like if you follow some of the like Ghanaian Instagram page or TikTok or Twitter page, there's like a lot of contention that a lot of Ghanaians have about the number of people repatriating to Ghana, primarily because it's making it almost impossible to afford to live there anymore, right? And that's the same way that we experience gentrification in our own cities here. And it is something that we really struggle with, because if people were actually repatriating with Ghanaian jobs, it would be a little bit different because they would at least be operating within the economy. But when we come from outside with currency that has, that is stronger, has stronger backing or whatever, then we have to be aware of what impact we're having on the economy. And we can't just think about it from our sort of individualistic, like, yeah, it's so much cheaper for me to come over here and I can live off my Social Security check or my whatever. It's like, but this is not the way people make money here. And so, like, literally, like, I think, who was I talking to? One of my friends, I think, while I was there, was talking about, there was a couple days, I think right before I came, because I got there just before Christmas, where like basic essentials had like quadrupled. Like bread and milk and shit like that. Just, I mean, and inflation is a larger problem, a larger issue of capitalism, and that's why we have to have that response. But I also think that, like, we can't just have this idealistic vision of ourselves repatriating and not understand the kind of structural wars we're engaging in, and the types of things that we're running away from here that we're creating in other places.
No, I think that's a great point to raise, because I think, especially particularly what you said as far as how we're pricing people out, and because there's money to be made in this rediscovery, like, it's become its own commodity. Like, it may have not been like that even when Asante wrote Afrocentricity, in the sense that there wasn't as much corporate focus on it. But now, like, you even see this with Ancestry.com, and they have this, they're pushing this reconnect. Now you get these travel sites, and also you see this push about Black travel, and can't stand those people, but like, you get this push about Black travel and people, and it's playing into this kind of thing. And I don't think people are honestly aware of it, because it's just like, oh, we get to rediscover it, but there's no critical lens. This goes to the point, though, of why it can't just be you just reconnecting with something. You have to deal with the material world. Like, this literally points to that, because if you don't, actual Africans are like, not actual Africans, but people, continental Africans, I should say, are sorry, but continental Africans are like struggling, in their own space, as you're trying to connect with your Africanness coming from America. Like, it's just, like, I don't know, like, again, we're not taught to think about these things, because, again, when you're in that idealistic sense, it's just like, I'm just going to do something that feels good, and I don't really have to consider the consequences of it. And that's this is a major pitfall of any kind of like Afrocentricity. It doesn't have a critical lens to that. And it also points to why socialism needs to be in that conversation, because that's the kind of thing that socialism is supposed to be able to address. It's like literally that kind of like situation where I can just move people to push them towards the bottom so I can come fit in, because the capitalist economy is based around that principle.
As much as and again, I don't want to dismiss like the altruistic projects that people engage in to help alleviate immediate suffering, right? So, like, I think there was some money to like do some water resourcing or whatever that they was kind of, I think that's something that Vic Mensa was already engaged in before. Like, like people are doing these little small projects, but again, they're not addressing sort of larger structural issues. And for me, you can do those types of things as your, what is it called? Community service is not the right word, but when wealthy have their money, I know, but you can do that and let that be. But then when you bring people together under the auspice of a Pan-African summit that's hearkening to these particular histories, it seems to me that you would have more of an understanding of where that came from, and that you might want to do a little bit more to actually engage it. And when you don't do that, it just feels opportunistic.
Mm.
And so like those are real, things that we have to grapple.
I pulled this because I feel like this is an example of when these things fall into this is the consequence of when these distinctions are not clear and you just play off of this stuff as kind of a vibe, so Afrocentricity, Africanism.
Oh, it was definitely a vibe. It was fun.
Yeah. And it's like when you do that and you try to create some kind of serious project, as opposed to just being a vibe, because vibes are fine in a given context. Yeah. But when you try to use your politics or your politics become a vibe, like this is a consequence of it. Now, the repatriation thing, to be fair, that's a broader problem that's not created. We're not saying that this summit created that. Like that's a broader issue that's been going on for a while. And like you said, that's not just in Ghana. That's a broader issue. They have those problems in South Africa. They have those problems, across the continent. But this is just playing within that, within that string of things. It's not, it's not helping. So,
but I still think there's potential, and so I just, I hope that things. I never want to be turned off by these kinds of things because people do it wrong. I want to be excited by the fact that so many people were intrigued by it as a general theme and wanted something out of it. And I'm happy to hear that so many people actually had a critique of it, because that means people were wanting more than they gave. And, hopefully we'll figure out how to keep doing it.
Yeah. I mean, the efforts need to be made, but again, I think it's trying to be nice. It's open to a lot of different a lot of hands can get in that jar if you're not careful.
Oh yeah, well that's for sure.
Yeah. So I'll just leave it at that. Okay, lastly, and then we really can close out here. We talked about the other example on the same coast, the Burkina Faso, Mali, and Guinea Federation. That's part of a larger project that's been going on with the last few years. After there's been coups and everything else in that area of kicking they're kicking the French soldiers out, and the Federation is to say we're gonna bring our resources together. So I think I wrote a question down for this. Is first of all, can you speak more to the alliance than what I've said, and then also the question is the growing alliance between these three countries a strong representation of revolutionary Pan-Africanism? Is it more in line with what you grew up under? How you come to understand it?
So I want to be honest and just say that, so I was following the coups very closely. I have not followed this particular moment as closely, but from what I knew and know of now, one of the things that they're up against, Guinea, Mali, and Burkina Faso, is really it also has to do with internal bullshit too, right? Because they're up against the ECOWAS sanctions and African Union. And again, this is why I think having these conversations about what is Pan-Africanism as opposed to just because people think about the African Union as a Pan-Africanist organization. The Organization of African Unity and the OAU prior to the African Union was a different configuration of things. I find this iteration to be much more reactionary, and while it is Pan-African in the geographic sense, is not really pushing for a unified Africa under
you talking about the African Union?
Yes, the African Union.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, even the Organization of African Unity was, like Kwame Toure said, that wasn't even Pan-Africanism because it was a top down, and that had a lot of problems too. So
exactly, and it was very statist oriented, and had its own. But even that iteration was better than what we get now.
Definitely. Even Gaddafi's African,
but what I was
better than now, yeah,
exactly. What I will say though, the uprising in Burkina Faso and Mali were much more populist, like people oriented. The coup that happened in Guinea was a military coup, and we know that the military coup was led by people who were funded and backed initially by France and had relationships with the US. I do know that that Burkina Faso and Mali were much more public and adamant about the kicking the French out and like getting rid of these kinds of these forced or imposed relations between the French and even the US. I don't know that Guinea has really taken that same route in the public sense. I do know that like since
No,
you know
Guinea,
the new
to my
regime came to
knowledge, Guinea hasn't done that. That I kind of conflated a few things. Want to clarify that that
Mhm.
wasn't the Federation is all three of them. Guinea, I don't believe is
Yeah.
kicked out any French. I believe that's more Mali and
Yeah.
Burkina Faso. Yeah.
And so I bring that up just to answer your question about whether or not it's an example of revolutionary Pan-Africanism in this moment.
Mm-hmm.
I think the alliance is a very like pragmatic material one because of the state and condition that they're in. I would hesitate to call it revolutionary Pan-Africanism precisely because I don't really know where Guinea stands in terms of its own types of politics, right? I do know that like there was land that Sekou Toure's family owned prior to him becoming the mayor of Conakry and president of Guinea that he gave up, that he gave over to the government because they were living in government housing. I do know that they have subsequently given that land back to his family. I think they named the airport after Sekou Toure since then, but I don't really know the full revolutionary Pan-Africanist character of the Guinean government at this point, and I still have a lot of questions about it because of the military coup, all those things. So I think it's a possible step. And the reason why, and I think it's something to watch, and I think that, you know, I'll bring it back to, you know, another example that I always come to because I did my work in Venezuela. You know, Chavez initially attempted to come to power in '94 through a military coup that was unsuccessful.
Right.
He went to prison for that. He gets out and he actually gains his popularity during his time in prison. And when he comes out, he's actually elected president. He does not come to power through that coup. But even when he comes to power, he's progressive, but not really revolutionary at that point in 98, 99. It's not until the 2002 coup happens and he really has a sense of who his supporters are and who his enemies are, that the revolutionary push sort of begins. And so I say that to say there's absolutely this precedent of trying to create the goal was create a United States of Africa, right? So Mali, Burkina Faso, and Guinea forming this federation is very much in line with that, but we have to dig deeper to figure out in response to what and to what end, right? Is it just about them sort of creating this protection in this moment? Is this something that they're trying to push forward for a longer strategy? And I think that those are things that we don't know at the moment. And so I think it's not something that I can make a definitive like claim on, one, because I haven't followed it closely enough, but two, because we just have to wait and see. But I do think it is it's hopeful. Like it's something that I think is exciting to watch.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, considering just how down things have been in the continent, that's why it caught my eyes, especially with the growing multipolarity. Now, multipolarity, we haven't talked about that a lot on the show, so I don't want to speak too much on that without having I had to give a bunch of background. But multipolarity, I don't think is inherently revolutionary. I think sometimes people take it there, but it does help when there's just other power centers besides the U.S., you know, to kind of boil it down.
Absolutely.
So I think this is, in some ways, I think this is kind of a process of that too, like realizing kind of where the lines are being drawn and being like, okay, it's a small like collective at this moment, but like we're gonna align ourselves differently because they've also reached out to Russia and willing to do deals with them as well as China. So that in the growing multipolar world, there's a sense of like we're gonna try to take the deals that are best for us as opposed to just kind of acquiescing to the West. So I think again that isn't inherently to me revolutionary, like but it does create more options for those kind of revolutionary things to occur. because there's problems with, Russia and China as well. I don't think they're nearly as bad as the US, but but there's definitely problems there. So but they're trying to sort out some kind of like independence. I think that's worth looking at versus, and I think it's just that looking at it in that sense of like how to actually figure out your path as a nation is different than this just kind of esoteric stuff that we're talking about. Like, I think this is a much more interesting thing to watch than just this, like, we're going to have a conference, or we're going to just,
Absolutely.
Like even when we're talking about the conferences, like the fifth one was important. Not that any of them were like the Vic Mensa stuff, but like the fifth one was important because they were trying to, incorporate like more people across the diaspora, workers, and things of that nature to get at a more material base.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's important to watch. I think it's, I think we haven't, like you said, we have enough losses. We have enough things that like we're really struggling with, that we can have a little bit of hope when something looks promising, but we also just got to keep our eyes, the eyes on the prize, right? Like keep our eyes on the goal, and be able to be critical when things present themselves that are not, that are not doing the type of work that we think that they should be doing. I think, we can't constantly fall into that trap of being so excited by the potential of a thing that we don't acknowledge it for what it is and what it's showing us to be. Right?
No, that's a great point. That's for anything. Yeah. Like that's just for anything. Like, because I think something like this could get hyped up by people probably in our circles. Could be, I don't know yet, but it could become more. Yeah. We don't want to get tricked on that either. We can see the other stuff for what it is without speaking to that, but like, but yeah, I just think that these things are important to watch because it's just the content that's been down for so long, and you barely get, other than maybe a conversation about like kicking white people off the land or something. Like that's the most progressive idea we hear sometimes at this point. So
in some places that is progressive. It's not. That's a different. We have that conversation differently in the U.S. than on the continent.
No, I'm not saying it's not. I'm just saying that's the best we're gonna get often.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
Is reclaiming the land back and moving them off. And in the U.S., it's taught as this reactionary. Say what?
Say we land back and then what?
Yeah. So, so yeah, I don't know, but yeah, I think I think this is a unique way of looking at all these things. So I appreciate you being on here. I don't know if there's any last words. Again, this will definitely, especially with the time we've spent, this will definitely be 2 episodes.
My daddy, he just wants to know when, because he watches everything that I do.
Yeah, this will be up. This should be up. First one should be up sometime this week.
Okay.
And then the next one, it'll be on the audio and video side. But no,
say thank you for having me. Even though LDI is no longer a thing, I always like having these conversations. I always feel like they're productive and generative for me as an individual. But I'm always happy to be in conversation about this stuff. So I appreciate the invite.
Yeah, thanks for coming through. I think it was. I mean, we obviously our show's called the Black Miss Podcast, so we don't really like put too much emphasis on Black History Month because, like we do this every month. but I think this is an interesting convo for Black History Month, particularly because Black History Month tends to be so I almost say Eurocentric, but that's another conversation. But it tends to be so American centric,
Yeah, it
tends to be very American centric, and it tends to deal with first Blacks, whatever that means. Which first Blacks falls apart when you leave America, right? Like it doesn't even hold up. So, so it's like, I think this is helpful to give people something else to consider beyond like the kind of borders that are imposed on us. So thanks for coming through. It was a good reunion. Always good to have these conversations. So peace out.
Thank you.
Okay. Fresh out the plane in a whole nother state. I'm trying to eat down a whole nother plate. Seem like my homies was stuck in the hood. I just told them be safe in the state.